Yo, what's up, Zox fam? We're back with some more Etheria Restart. Now, it is time to get into this LD selection box. This is by far one of the most important things I would say we're going to have coming into the game to date. And this is definitely something you want to make sure you're making the best investment choice. Now, there's a couple of different pieces of advice that I want to make sure you guys leave with from this video so that you're making the most educated decision you possibly can. Now, I'm going to obviously be telling you guys what I'm going to be going for. But like I said, I want to make sure you guys are leaving with information so you can also make a really good choice. And we're just going to go ahead and dive right into it. Now, the first thing I actually want to start off with is that they stated that this is going to be a selection box. Now, I want to actually bring up a previous event we had, which was the Cipher box that we actually had the ability to choose class. We had Tsukiyomi and Veronica in that box. And that box actually was placed in our consumables. And this is going to be my advice to those of you guys that are coming in new or returning and you haven't made a ton of progression on your account. Make sure you hold on to this box, okay? And the reason why that is because what your goal is when you're coming into the game, you are going to be pulling on the permanent summon banner. You're trying to flesh out your account. You are not trying to isolate pick anything. And there's two pieces of advice that I think most people would give you is number one, save your RGB selector banner, like until you actually can see what it is you actually need on your account. And they also would tell you save that LD selection box. And the reason why that is because if we go over here to probabilities, you can literally pull any LD in the game. Okay, so there's a possibility that you could pick a unit on that selection box and then you're doing hundreds of pulls anyway because you're new or you're returning because you didn't progress that much. And then you end up pulling the exact same unit and now you kind of almost waste it. The goal isn't to pull dupes in the very beginning. It's to diversify your account. The more you have, the better off you'll be. Okay, so that's going to be my advice. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's actually go over to the characters and let's talk about some of these LDs. I want to start off with one of the popular ones. Everybody wants to know the answer. Should I be going for this character? It's going to be Lily. And the thing about Lily, okay, I've seen there was some people creating this like narrative that like this character needs a lot of investment to work. That is not true. Number one, the bare minimum that you need for Lily is skill 1. Like literally skill 1 makes her work from the beginning to the end of the game. I would even argue she's one of the more lower investment LDs, considering for what she does. I would even say like when we're talking about what she and how she works in the game, she opens up a lot of the game a lot earlier. Okay. Now it is possible to clear a lot of content in the game without her, but I definitely will not argue the fact that Lily can help you open up those things a lot easier because of the fact that she's able to, one, skyrocket DPS on whoever your DPS is, and also she can move them really, really fast so that they can get more turns, okay? So that's the value that she's offering. You really honestly are building and really only focusing speed because the more times Lily can go, the more times your ally that's doing damage can go. That's just how she works, right? Now, when we're talking about areas of the game that she works in, again, we're talking about literally almost every area in the game, from Terramatan to Dokyoki and more burst setups, right? To Aurora, right? She can work in all modular dungeons. She works in the shell dungeons from Nico Nada. If you're doing Sharon, if you're doing Shadowflame Honyan, she works there. If you're doing Rengoku, she works there. PvP, she is a meta unit in PvP. Probably will be banned quite a bit for you in the earlier stages because more people are going to have her built. And if you pick her first and somebody doesn't have her, they're probably going to ban her because she's just that much of an enabler. So Lily is really good in basically almost every area of the game. I would definitely say for a lot of people that don't have her, this is definitely going to be a high value choice. But there are some areas in the game that are extremely hard to get through. And there's actually some LDs that will make those other areas even easier. And I want to talk about them before you go and just say, I'm getting Lily. Now, of course, to kind of tie it all up with her, if I was to give you guys like the full scope of like investment skill 1, skill 2, I think is definitely helpful if you can do it. That's going to be increasing the turn meter, the crit damage, turn duration, and then the reduction of this so you can do it more times. The skill 3, honestly, if you can get that at any point, is going to be huge for her. But you can actually wait on that. But that definitely will help a lot because it actually will reset the skill cooldowns of all skills that you have. And so that ends up being like super huge versus it only being at the 2 turns. So yeah, definitely a high prio, I feel like, for most players. Just because she does help out in so many other areas, but she is more intended for more burst setups. You can use her in some by tweaking, like other setups by tweaking some of her like speeds and stuff like that. But yeah, she's definitely intended to allow you to be able to burst more easily. So that's definitely like Lily's value, right? Now the next unit, obviously here, we got to talk about Dokyoki. I think with Dokyoki is definitely a underrated, not as much as she was, but still to some degree, because there are some players that like don't really understand that Dokyoki is just as good as Lily, just in her own way, respectively. And the thing that she does, and that's required for her, I would argue, like at the very beginning stages of the game, Dokyoki is definitely going to help you out tremendously if you're lacking speed. I think one of the things that a lot of players like don't acknowledge is the fact that not everybody, and I mean a vast majority of people, are going to have good speed rolls, right? It makes it much harder to use characters like Lily when you don't really have the speed to really use her, right? And in that case, that means you need to actually build into more bulkier teams. You need to take advantage of buffs that have duration value increases. And that's going to be Dokyoki, right? The thing is that, like, take, for example, her data stream. The value of that will skyrocket in longer form fights because you're able to build up the stacks you're able to build up the stacks in longer form fights much easily. And so you're increasing your speed, you're increasing your damage. So she does better in longer form fights, especially with lower investment out of the box. As you start to invest more into her, you'll start to be able to build up your backup stacks quicker. You'll be able to get more turn meter push. The cooldown reductions are much lower. And on top of that, you can actually get more purification out of her, which is actually really good for things like PvP, where, yes, Dokyoki is being used as a counter to CC setups. And she works extremely good. And even in those cases, you can actually just build her really, really fast. Because if you get those backup datas off, then every time one procs, that's purifying at max three debuffs, which is huge. Now, I will say, like, when we're talking about areas of the game she works, definitely those Dokyoki teams. And you can even look at videos like, shout out to the homies, Sturby and True Evil, Barcode. A lot of people are using characters like Dokyoki for their much slower, like, entry, like getting into certain difficulties or certain dungeons. She helps out tremendously with making sure your team is being facilitated, staying alive, keeping movement going. Like, she's really, really good with that. And then, of course, we're looking at other areas. She works in the inner sync echoes really well. Obviously, Ember Track, she's actually really good in there. And then, of course, you can use her in your Ethernet rally as a light unit. But yeah, definitely in those later areas, I feel like she's going to shine a lot more because she's usually typically a lot more bulkier, and then you can build her a lot faster too. And if you want, putting investment skill-wise, for some people, there's a few people that don't even have Lily on their account, and Dokyoki's been able to supplement that value for them. But I'm not saying that's what you got to do, but I'm just saying that there are players that literally have not had Lily, and Dokyoki was what got them through a lot of content. So I think that she's really, really good, and maybe not as high of a prio as Lily, but she's still a great investment choice. Now, from there, I actually want to talk about the boy Messiah, okay? So Messiah is going to be accessible. I think that, like, for lack of better words, Messiah is going to be definitely leaning a little bit more into PvP and in-game nuking, right? Now, the reason why I talk about in-game with him, because I don't think a lot of people actually realize the value of Messiah in wave clearing content. In boss content, it does kind of suck a little bit because he's not the best, but he can do it, if that's fair to say. So, like, he can do things like Terramatan, he can do things like Dokyoki, he can do things like Aurora, but he's not the best at it. And a lot of that is just due to the fact that his gimmick is based around him killing, right? So if he's able to kill, you basically will be able to increase the duration on the invincibility that will be proccing from the skill 3. So that's something that ends up being like a huge thing. So when Decide defeats an enemy, he gains 1 turn of invincibility. If he's already under invincibility, the duration of it is extended by a turn, right? So I think that that's something that's really, really important to note. this can be used as a cheat code to get through a lot of anti-sync echo later down the line, because the issue a lot of your other DPSs will run into is that, one, they're still DPSs. So if they get hit, they're going to get hit pretty hard. And things will end up being faster than you. So the fact that he's a character that can actually proc invincibility means that he can actually keep himself alive a lot longer. And then if he is scoring any kills, he can basically ensure that he's keeping that invincibility up. But like I said, in like boss content, sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel the best. And so that's kind of like some of the areas he might suffer in. I will say, if you're trying to get the most out of Messiah, he is a DPS and he will require, when you're first using him, skill 5. But later down the line, or sorry, skill 5, skill 3. But later down the line, he is going to need to be 555 if you really want him to do his job efficiently. And you're trying to use him in a lot of other PvE setups. So that's kind of that. I will say, though, still cream of the crop in PvP. Definitely one of the strongest defense ignore units in the game. So that with like a harvest build on a revelation, like this dude can still absolutely slap. So I think that, yeah, it's definitely not a weak character, but you just have to kind of be mindful of some of the areas where you'll really see him shine. Versus where, again, in comparison to some of the other options, it would just make more sense to go with that. But that's going to be basically that on Messiah. Now, the next unit we have here is actually Heinrich, okay? In my opinion, I think Heinrich is by far one of the most broken LDs in the game. I think that, you know, when we're talking about buff stripping, he is one of the best to do it in the game, period. We're also talking about like damage scaling with his last word proc, which will increase your chances of critting and also how much crit damage that enemy is taking. And then, of course, he can apply a blocks buff debuff, right? Now, the thing is that with how Heinrich works, he is definitely going to be a stripper, a speed unit for the most part for a lot of people in the very beginning of the game. Later on, when you're able to actually utilize him in like things like PvP, he ends up actually being a really, really good unit for scaling damage, dealing damage, and basically preventing characters from enabling themselves. So he actually can counter characters pretty well, like Tiamat. Definitely a character that like people like will ban, right? Like if they see him, they're gonna try to get rid of him because he can definitely mess up their setup. And so yeah, he's really, really good. Now, if we're to sit here and talk about like any lattice investment, I mean, like technically you don't have to go crazy with doing that right off rip, but I will say that if you really want him to work, skill 3 is going to be pretty huge for him. Definitely will say that with the skill 2, not as crazy. I would say with the skill 1, increasing your chance of dispelling buffs to 50% and your chance of inflicting block is actually pretty huge as well. So definitely the skill 3 is like one thing I would definitely say you want on him at some point. Skill 1 definitely will help out a ton. And then the skill 2 is just going to increase your chance of wound, which don't sleep on wound. Wound can be really, really good going up against a lot of those healers like the Sonias, the Ling Lows, stuff like that in PvP. So yeah, he could actually be quite problematic in that way. Now, when we're talking about dungeons that you can actually use him in, you can use him in Terra Matan, you can use him in Dokyoki technically, and you can even use him in Aurora. So he does work. I would definitely say for the job of stripping, Aurora and Terra Matan, he's one of the top options and one of the best for that. And then when we're talking about the other PvE content like Anti-Sync Echoes, things like the Ember Track, and as well as the Ethernet Rally, Heinrich is definitely going to be a great enabler there. So yeah, I think that his stock for support is pretty high in my opinion. I feel like now, because more people are starting to actually invest in him, they're seeing how strong Heinrich actually really is. And he's not a hard character to build. He's really not a hard character to build. So yeah, I definitely think that Heinrich is also, again, really, really solid pickup for some players and has a lot of different areas that you can work in. Maybe in the beginning, he might not feel that great for some players, but later on, he definitely will feel amazing. Now, of course, we have our DPS Lilium that we have to talk about. Now, of course, same disclaimer like I gave for Messiah. She is going to be a 5/5/5 character, okay? I would argue that with Lilium, Lilium is also a character that when you're trying to really get the most out of her, you really need to have the abilities, like I said, invested. Also, too, She is able to ignore shield, and then she also has a damage multiplier increase to bosses. So she's one of the best bossing units in the game. I would say much earlier on, she is going to have the ability to hit pretty hard for where her modifiers are going to be. But considering that she has at max skill the 50% damage increase to bosses, and then if she's facing off against a non-boss, she will be able to HP ceiling decrease them. So this ends up being something that works extremely well with how her kit is in Terra Matan later. Aurora, she's able to one-shot that later. She can technically work in some Doki Doki setups. Not my first go-to, in my opinion, for a lot of people, but I mean, she can do some things there. And then all the shell dungeons she basically can do. So she can like one-shot Nico. She can deal with Sharon on her own. She can, basically nuke Shadow Flame Hoyan. And she's one of the best nukers for Rengoku. So yeah, she's really, really strong. I would say, of course, again, she does need 555, but that's kind of the normal thing that you need for your DPS. So we're not going to act any different. Like that's like, this big surprising thing. That's just what's required for her. And like I said, those are just some of the areas that she'll also work in. Now, if we actually go back real quick, let me actually start my quick battle back up. So we're being efficient here. So we got 10 refills. All right, cool. If we go back over here to the archive, all right, there's a couple of LDs we weren't able to see because I don't have them. And that's going to be gatewaying us into Shadow Sonia, right? Sonia. I feel like, for me personally, this is going to be the character that I get. Because number one, this is the only LD I'm missing. But the one thing that I noticed that Sonia actually deals with and does really well, like she deals with a lot of content that at least is not immune to poison. She's going to be giving you some of the better clears, like areas you're going to be like seeing a lot of people happy to be able to have a character like this for is going to be things like the Anasync Echoes. She does help in some of the Ember track, and then of course in Ethernet Rally. I would say on a PvE like generalized dungeon stuff, she's one of the best units in Terra Matan. So there's just that like off rip, like she's going to be speeding up a lot of people's Terra Matan clears. She's probably one of the fastest in a lot of shell dungeons, whether you're doing things like Nico Nana she can do early, even later she can still do it. Shadow Flame Hoyan, definitely a unit that can go in there and like be quite impressive, to be honest. So she's really able to tackle some of the harder pieces of content as far as like bosses in the game and stuff like that. And because her damage is poison, it's scaling off of HP, she's able to actually do extremely well. Now, I definitely will say, I think for Sonia, I think she needs to have her skill 1. And correct me if I'm wrong, chat. I think it's her skill 1 needs to actually be leveled. And as well as I think her skill 3, because her skill 3 is going to reduce her cooldown quite a bit. And she's a detonator. So she's able to settle all dots immediately that a person will possibly have stacked. Obviously, recommendation with her is she just needs to be with a Fungus or an Oval, and then chef's kiss, you have yourself a detonation DOT bomb. So yeah, me personally, I feel like I might end up picking up this character because it is the only other one I'm missing, which I think that's kind of the logical thing here. But yeah, she's definitely really, really good. And like I said, that's probably where a lot of her value is going to lie for a lot of players. Now, outside of Sonia, we also have, let me see if there's anyone else we didn't mention. We didn't mention Mio. So Mio's also going to be a part of this selection banner, selection box. And I feel like Mio is definitely an extremely strong Animus within the game. A character that was initially underrated, but I think since then has now pushed herself to the upper ranks. The thing is, turn meter redistribute and turn meter still, any of that and the higher spectrum of the game kind of gets mitigated quite a bit. So it won't be the best necessarily for anything other than really like Terra Matan later, if you want to use it for that. But the other thing is too, if we're talking about PvP, Mio's actually really good for like being second slot, if not opening, because she can redistribute turn meter and then also has the ability to CC freeze. If we're talking about like investment with her, skill 3, skill 2 would be my advice. And I feel like, yeah, again, just the areas that she's able to work in, from wave clearing content to being able to do some of the shell dungeons. She's not a bad LD at all. Definitely not a bad LD at all. Now, lastly, and the only reason why I want to talk about her is because she's probably going to have a rate up banner, is going to be Yelly. Okay. Now, I will say that Yelly is definitely one of the most self-sufficient DPSs in the game because she offers her own defense break. She has her own crit rate up buff. She's able to, with her passive, which is super important for her, increase her follow-up attack chance to 100%. And then after each cast, the chance of triggering the next cast reduces to 60% of the current chance. So her whole gimmick is follow up, DPS, follow up, and kill, right? Like that's her whole job and her whole gimmick. The other thing is too is she's one of the few DPSs in the game that can also buff still, and I feel like this is why I personally run her 555 because I like having a higher increased chance of being able to steal stuff from people. But I know that there are some individuals that run her 455 because they don't feel like they need to necessarily have that very last increased chance to buff steal to 30%. They're fine and content with it being at 20 and just having the extra damage multiplier. So I feel like, you know, when we're talking about areas, she is cream of the crop. She can do things like Terra Matan. She can do Aurora. I've seen a couple of setups with her in Doki, but again, that just means you got to have that tuned. And then, of course, when we're looking at like the shell dungeons, she's going to be able to clear solo DPSing Nico, Sharon. She can do Shadow Flame Hoyan, and she can do Rengoku. So she is very, very pristine, in my opinion. And so, yeah, that's basically that. Now, out of all of these LDs, I want to kind of give you guys at least a little bit of an idea of who I think your top 3 choices are going to be. I would say personally, I think Lily would be a great pickup for a lot of players. I think Shadow Sonia would be a really good pickup for a lot of players. And I also think Lilium would be an extremely good pickup for a lot of players. I think that those would be, in my opinion, the top 3 that players should be aiming for. I feel like Sonia is going to open up so much of that harder content because dots just scale so well. And that's just more resources you can dump into your account or get back so you can actually do more or other things on your account. I also feel like Lily is going to be a unit that opens up a lot of content for a lot of players. And even later down the line, she just really does well at self-facilitating your team, making sure they're on agenda, etc. And so, yeah, she's really, really good. And then, of course, with Lilium is like really strong, in my opinion. Great boss damage. One of the only characters in the game that can hit bosses as hard as she does. The skill 2 allows you to be able to deal with, potentially CCing the target. But if you get the kill, you can AoE CC. So basically having like a form of like an evolvable CC is like really, really strong. So I feel like, yeah, those like are definitely my top 3 choices. I would say honorable mention would obviously be Heinrich and then, of course, Doki. And that's like kind of my perception there. Now, the thing is that, like, I know what some people are going to ask, as far as like Yelly, should I be pulling on that banner if the time comes? I personally will say that you can pull, but not until the end. And here's why. Because I want to give you guys just like something that we just kind of learned along the way is you want to make sure you're always giving yourself able time to make a decision. So 4, 3, 2, couple of days, whatever, maybe a week before the banners go away, then try to decide or determine whether or not you want to actually keep or invest, into what it is you already have or go for this next new unit. Because other than that, you're going to be putting yourself in a potential situation where there might be another unit that comes and it might not be Yelly that you want to actually 555. You might get lucky and get Lilium. Now you want to 555 Lilium. So it just kind of all depends, right? But those are essentially the immediate values that these characters bring to the table.